so much. Thanks, guys. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. Welcome to tonight's screening.
God, I want to see more movies like this, movies that are just creative for the sake of being creative and free.
We sold out the Elgin Theater!
My people! Toronto Film Festival!
Great films, they leave me feeling a little more alive and connected, and they remind me to laugh and hope and hurt and feel.
I just want to tell great stories, and I want to tell different stories. We don't only have to tell one type of story.
Make sure everyone's comfortable before we start. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Platform Press Conference. I'm delighted to have several of the directors from the program here to join us. I'll ask a few questions to start, and then I'll throw it to the audience, and hopefully you guys will have some questions as well. I'm going to start with Armando, because opening night film, we'll start with you. Obviously, you've said a lot already about comedy and politics and satire through a lot of the other work you've done. Can you talk a little bit about finding the comedy in history and in the historical context of politics here in this film?
What with the death of Stalin? Yeah, it's a number of things. I mean, I said this at the premiere. I'd spent the last 4 or 5 years looking at American politics, and I kind of wanted to go and look at something completely different. And by coincidence, I ended up doing something about a dangerous narcissist who terrorizes his own country. But I've always been fascinated by that era, Stalin in the 1940s and 50s, and how an ideology can take over, and the attempts by a government to tell you what to think and what to say and to control information, and then when the narrative changes, to tell you to think the complete opposite of what you were told to think. So that's always been, and that's a driving force of a lot of satire. And George Orwell in 1984 was all predicated on all that. So I've always been fascinated with that. And then I was sent the graphic novel by Fabien Nury, the French graphic novel called The Death of Stalin, which set out lots of true events surrounding his death and the panic and scramble to see who succeeded him. And the moment I saw it, I just thought, that's the film I want to make. I mean, it was an instant. I don't have to think any more about this. This is it. And from then on, and I've mentioned, I told HBO I want to stop doing Veep, and because I want to make this now. So it was just an impulsive thing. It wasn't a lot of conscious thought. It was a instinctive. That's it.
I wanted to ask Iram about kind of the autobiographical nature of your film, and a little bit kind of how you built it and how you put it together, and what was the experience like for you seeing it come to life on screen?
It's been a long journey. I wanted to make this movie before I made I'm Yours, but I wanted to use my time to make a movie which could give different perspectives, so it didn't become just a story of a young girl being angry at her father. So for me, it took a long while to dig into it, and it's inspired by my own experience, but I fictionized it. And yes, this is something which has been very close to my heart, these kind of issues about social control. So yeah, it took some years.
For Michael, but also for Barbara, I wanted to ask, there's some strong themes of kind of gender relations and gender politics in both your films, and I wanted to talk about kind of how you navigated those, how they played a role in the writing, how they played a role in the story in the film. Why don't we start with you, and then we'll go to you.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I just covered in a Q&A we just had at the screening now. I really wanted to write a female character that was as complex as some of the like seminal like anti-heroes we have in cinema. Like some of my favorite characters in cinema are like anti-heroes. People like, I don't know, Travis Bickle or Corleone or Daniel Plainview. And I find it culturally quite strange how we don't have those same anti-heroes for women. And the ones that, at least the ones that I can think of, whether that's from, we need to talk about Kevin or Gone Girl or Carrie or from Wuthering Heights, they all come from literature. And I really struggled to think of original female characters that were, yeah, that you were kind of empathized with but challenged by. So that it was a sort of, that was a big driving force. Yeah.
Barbara?
It's interesting what to say about the literature and the strong and the active women, because for me it was also very important not to show a victim, not the woman as a victim, and I talk about the relationship between the doctor and the patient. Usually, I mean, it's after a novel, and there are other novels and also a film about the same issue, but before my film Mademoiselle Paradis, it was always more the story of him, and it was more the story of how he helped her. She's the poor one, she's the victim, she's the absolutely the passive one. So for me it was important to show that she got a voice, but she herself, not only because the guy helped her to get it, but because it was also her fighting for it.
For Camilla and for Xavier, both of you work so well with child actors in your films, and I wanted to ask what that process was like and what some of the challenges were. Why don't we start with you?
Well, for the scene and scenes, it's been a long process as well. Both of the main actresses, kids, and they're unprofessional actors. And it took a long time to cast, because in this film they need to be able to dance, they need to be able to sing, and they need to be able to act as well in a story and a character that is not actually easy for kids, with my treatment of directing as well. So, but it's a film about twin sister and brother, and that's also another challenge because I need to make them connect as a twin, and exploring their character and put a story in their daily life. It's always been a pleasure. This is my second feature. My first feature also I work with the kids, and I just love to explore their world. Yeah.
I prefer to answer in French because my English is a nightmare. Pour mon film, oui, j'ai fait un travail avec parce que il a 11 ans, hein, l'enfant dans le film.
For my film, I worked with a young boy, who had 11 years in the film.
Et effectivement, c'est un film assez difficile avec des scènes très dures pour un enfant de son âge. Donc,
in fact, it's quite a tough film for a boy his age. It's quite difficult.
Donc, j'ai dû faire un long casting pour trouver l'enfant qui aurait cette maturité et qui a une écoute surtout. C'était ça qui était intéressant, parce que dans le film, c'est un enfant qui prend très peu la parole, mais qui écoute beaucoup.
So I had to do a long search to find the right individual, and a boy, who would be able to listen, because in the film, he doesn't speak much, but he listens a lot.
Et pour le travail sur le tournage, il y avait bien sûr une coach qui était là pour travailler avec lui et pour veiller à son bien-être.
But he had the help of a coach to work together with him to be able to get the work done properly.
For Joanne, I wanted to ask about the film plays with genre in such an interesting way. I was hoping you could comment on the role of it both in the writing process and the directing process. Yeah, I was asking about what the film does with genre in such an interesting way. It plays with different genres. And I was hoping you could comment about how you put that together. Like parts of it are a love story, parts of it are a gangster film. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm genre, like parts of it are a love story, parts of it are a gangster film. I apologize.
Sorry, I'm very sorry. So, as a French person, my English is terrible, so I will answer in French. Oui, donc le mélange de genres, oui, le film était un film assez hybride, où je passe un film noir, violent, lyrique, poétique, avec de la violence et une sorte de romantisme presque tarte.
Yes, there are various genres in it. There's the lyrical part, there's the dark part of it. So I go from one genre to the other.
And, et donc, l'idée était de proposer un film personnel.
And so the idea was to propose a film that was very personal to her.
Donc, et hybride.
And which was a hybrid.
For Nabil, I wanted to ask, the film in some ways could be considered an essay film, and you have a lot of balls in the air that you're juggling throughout it. Could you talk a little bit about the editing process and how you put it all together and how you made it feel cohesive?
What was the beginning of the question, please? Like an essay?
Like an essay film.
What do you mean? What is it?
Trial?
Sorry? What does that mean exactly?
Composition?
Yeah.
Composition. The script was very much written, I should say, since the beginning, going from one character to another, because we wanted them to be 5 to express all we wanted to express with Mariam, the co-script writer. And we knew also that there's going to be a stage at the editing that's going to be very long, because the film would be built at the editing process.
And for Cleo, finally, I wanted to ask, the film in some ways is such a beautiful marriage of kind of art and psychology, and how you balance those two things throughout what you're doing with each shot, with each scene, with each beat in the film.
I guess, yeah, I hadn't thought of it as that. So there's no in a way, there's no kind of conscious trying to balance those things, but you know, in a way, it's about two people who desperately want to connect, but they can't communicate with each other, and that's quite difficult on film because so much of it for both of them is internal. So the challenge was how do you create enough subtext for you to understand what's going on, even though they're either not speaking at all or saying very, very little. And in a way, I suppose part of the joy of it was once I started working with the actors, with Ruth Wilson and Mark Stanley,
once we got to the edit, it was really a process of taking dialogue away. So we kept stripping it back and back and back, so that because the stuff that you needed on the page, you didn't need once it was embodied by the actors.
I'll ask one more question, then I'll throw it out to the audience. But for everyone, I'm going to start with Armando again. One of the mandates of Platform for us is that it's kind of auteur cinema, and that we consider all of you auteurs or auteurs in the making, building your careers right now. When you're making something, do you think about how it fits in with everything you've made, everything you want to make in the future? For those of you that's a first feature, the other things you're thinking about, are there themes that you're interested in exploring on a career basis, or just for this specific film?
For The Death of Stalin, I knew that, you see, I've never done something set in the past. I've never done something based on real people. And actually, although it is a comedy, it's not necessarily funny all the way through. You know, it deals with, and it doesn't shy away from the atrocities that went on in Stalin's, you know, the millions being taken to the gulags and worse. And for me, it was about actually wanting to do something that took me out of my comfort zone. And I didn't want to do you know, the thick of it or Veep in Russia. It wasn't that. I wanted to think more cinematically, and in particular, not just the look, getting the look absolutely right, but the structure of it. You know, I had it all mapped out, beginning, middle, and end. And the music. The music's an important character in the film. So a lot of the different aspects of production for me were just as important as the script in the early stages of the film, and a lot of preparation. So it was about taking me out of my comfort zone, and hopefully taking the audience, I mean, if I have an audience, but taking my audience a little bit out of their comfort zone as well.
Anybody can feel free to jump in, or I can call on you, but I would ask the same question of all of you, how you feel that way.
For me, it is important to tell stories that I engage myself in, which is stories about people who somehow, humans we don't hear so much about, or their voices, like in this movie, like the father. We don't hear so much about the parents' voices. I'm curious about them, and I like to do research for myself. It's also a research to make movie, and also challenging myself to try to tell stories in a different way for myself.
I want to say that, as you say, that to put people into the light, I think your film is also called The Seen and the Unseen, and I think this is something that maybe also there is some similarity in these films, that also in my film I wanted to put someone into the light who was not seen in the history, for instance. So I think about the narrative, I think about what is how responsible are we, what do we show, and what is our attitude towards also these characters we talk about. And it doesn't matter if it's some autobiographical thing, or it just has to be personal. That was my first experience now with a written script. It was before, in my earlier films, I wrote myself. But still, I could be very personal.
Maybe I can jump in, since we are talking about something personal here. Yeah. Again, as I said before, it's my second feature film. So at that time, I just want to search of myself, actually, as a creator, as a storyteller, like who is me. That's why it's very personal film. And in this case, I question myself as well, like, what kind of who is like Indonesian woman? I'm from Indonesia, and especially like what kind of Asian human we are constructed of beliefs, myths, and everything. That's why I want the film to be very subtle, and it's a very simple story, but I'm looking for the depth of that humanity, like the depth of what we are actually as a person constructed of, and as a woman as well, of course. Yeah.
All right, well, I'll throw it out to the audience. Does anybody have any questions? There's one in the back.
Hi, Russell from Red Carpet News. My question's to everyone, but I guess perhaps starting with Armando. I think many of the films at TIFF are wildly entertaining, but also contain deeply personal stories and a lot of social commentary subtext. And I'm curious what you feel that boundary is between the responsibility of a storyteller to entertain and the obvious opportunity to educate or steer the world in the right direction.
I don't think I'm capable of steering the world in the right direction, but I mean, I'm coming from my background is comedy, and I've always said, you write about what you love and admire, or about what makes you angry or frustrated. But I don't think if you're writing political comedy, I don't think you can change people's opinion. If you want to change people's political view, you need to go out and campaign and write journalism and research and all these things. I don't think, I'm primarily there as a entertainer or as a storyteller. With something like The Death of Stalin, it's a part of history that I don't think today we actually know much about. But also I was conscious of the fact it's about what happens when power is accumulated in one person. And hopefully, the subtext of it is that people are taking away from it is this whole business of fake news and false narratives and new histories and so on. If it's warning people that the democracy that we have, it's not permanent, and if we don't keep nourishing it, it will fall apart. So that's the subtext of it. But I think if you set out to, change the destiny of the world with your film, I think you'll go insane with frustration.
Obviously it's a lofty goal, it's a huge goal, but I am curious what Nabil feels about also the role, the line between entertainment and political agenda of cinema.
Well, I don't think that it's the part of the director to educate the people. I think it's the part of the Ministry of Education. Our only goal should be to be sincere and say what is obsessing us, what is haunting us every day. It's 18 years now that I moved from Europe, France, to Casablanca, Morocco. And I think it's only because I felt that at a certain time I wasn't inspired anymore by the city, the country, or the society where I lived in. And now that I live in the Arab world, even if sometimes there are some fights I have to do much stronger than in Europe before, like with my previous film, Much Loved, still, it's exhausting. You feel sometimes very alone, but it's a very inspiring society, and you feel that you can put a brick on the wall every day just by being sincere.
It's interesting you talk about sincerity, because I think, when we've, several of you have mentioned personal cinema and how personal the films are to you. And so I'm curious, do you feel like it's possible to make films without it being at least a little bit personal? I think that, we haven't talked about it yet, but I'd love for Michael to talk about the personal element of the film for you, and then also both of you.
Just on the question that was asked, I suppose I don't see those things as mutually exclusive, between a film being entertaining and being about something. I at least thought in my film that in some ways I wanted to use some genre aesthetic techniques or approach as a way to kind of cast a spell on the audience, and then I could sort of smuggle in some sort of study about human behavior. And sometimes there is a temptation, like amongst us filmmakers as well, to say that cinema should be this. But I'm always so surprised that the medium is so versatile. It will resist any kind of one person's definition. So I think there's some films that I love, like Reservoir Dogs. I don't know if it's really about anything, but it's experientially meaningful in the same way that a piece of music is. And then I love films like The Battle of Algiers or a short film about killing, which, you know, there is some kind of utilitarian benefit from those films. So it could be, there can be the kind of Venn diagram approach, and it's entertaining and it's about something, and it can be, you know, the opposite of those extremes, and it can just be fun, and it can be sort of really serious. And yeah, I'm always surprised by that versatility.
Can I ask about the personal element of your film? Can I?
Yeah, this film is a psychological thriller, I suppose, if you're going to put a genre on it. But it was inspired by my impressions of growing up on this island, and it was a very safe and idyllic place to grow up as a kid, but it had sort of harbored some dark stories, and I always found that so incongruous, like when I was growing up, about how could this place that almost feels like as quaint and safe as a sort of fairy tale setting have be the kind of epicenter of danger as well. And so it was a kind of riff off of those childhood impressions as opposed to being autobiographical.
And I wanted to ask the same of Xavier and of Joan, because I feel, you know, both of your films feel very personal. And so I wanted to ask what you yourself feel you brought to it in terms of like a piece of yourself versus just what you were thinking.
Alors moi j'ai besoin, quand je fais pour ramener le film justement à moi et pour que le film soit personnel.
I need, when I'm doing the film, to make it very personal and pull it back to myself.
Au contraire de commencer avec un matériel le plus éloigné de moi.
As opposed to start with a material that is far away, or a subject that is far away, the treatment of it.
C'est le cas donc avec ce film qui est l'adaptation très libre d'un livre.
And this is the case with this particular film, which looks like a book.
De From Guillermo Rosales. Et c'est ensuite que je peux en fait commencer à m'approprier l'univers et le ramener à moi en fait.
So she started with that book, and then having said that out there, then she started working to bring it back to a more personal approach, treatment of it.
En l'occurrence, le héros est un exilé.
The hero, the main personage, it is somebody who has been exiled.
Et je suis fille d'immigrés.
And she herself is an immigrant's daughter.
Et j'ai certainement été chercher là-dedans des éléments personnels de mon histoire.
And naturally, she did go and look personal elements and invest personal elements in the story.
Pour moi, ce n'est pas du tout quelque chose d'autobiographique ou de personnel.
In my case, there was nothing autobiographical or personal in it.
C'est plutôt le sujet et le contexte dans lequel je vis et moi en tant que citoyen face à ce sujet qui m'intéresse d'aller et de creuser le travail.
In my case, it was the society in which I'm living and my entourage which pushed me to go and explore that subject.
Et pour que ça devienne personnel, j'ai besoin, moi, de m'immerger dans le sujet. Donc, j'ai fait beaucoup de rencontres avec des juges, des policiers qui sont en rapport avec le sujet de mon film.
And in order to make it personal, he actually did quite a lot of footwork and study and interviews with police people and judges and people who have been involved, so as to invest himself into it and put his personal touch on it.
I'm going to check back to the audience. Does anybody have any questions? It's a quiet house today. I mean, look, in the idea of the auteur spectrum, I know it seems trite, but I'm curious what each of you are working on next and how you've been informed by these projects specifically. And we can start with Clio. Or not.
Maybe not.
Okay, let's start with Barbara.
I have to admit that it was really a big pleasure not to write the script myself this time, although I love writing, but the whole process is it's so much to write and direct, and sometimes you even produce, or you have to work because you can't get only money from your filmmaking. So it is a lot. We all know that, and I realized that this going into the tunnel and just writing, I can't do so much anymore, unfortunately, and so I started to be more open for scripts, and I realized how creative or inspiring this is. So there are these moments, like maybe every one of us has, that I thought, wow, so next time I just need now a good script, and I'm going to shoot. So you long for good screenplays and for starting the next project. So okay, so. But on the other hand, there are things you want to tell, because it's really, for instance, I have one issue I work on since 7 or 8 years. Of course, you don't get rid of it. You have to do it yourself. So I think the combination of having projects that are written by others or inspired by others and your own stories you still have to tell, for me, it's the best, because it's like a relief if you don't, put out everything from yourself. It's a relief to have also other projects.
I agree with you. I will do the same. I'm open, and also there is stories I want to tell, but it will take time. But I think I will also be open to see if I get a great script. I would like to do that too.
I'm going to do another adaptation. I'm going to do David Copperfield next year. I'm a huge fan of Dickens, and I didn't think I would end up in my films. I mean, I've done with Stalin, that's an adaptation of someone else's story, and this will be as well, and trying as much as possible to use Dickens' own dialogue. So we might as well use one of the best writers in the world to write your screenplay. So, and that will be about finding an ensemble, but exploring. It's interesting what everyone say. You do bring your own personal. I have personal experiences of. David was worried about being poor, and then he becomes successful, and then being poor again. And I've seen that in my family background. And you bring your own little shards of autobiography to it, and then try and make it something that is accessible for everyone.
I don't know what I'm doing next yet. If anyone has any ideas. But similar to Barbara and Iram, like I'm really keen to collaborate. I find writing the hard part. It's the donkey work. It's like it's the graft. I think because because you as a director, it's so collaborative, the role. With an actor on a performance and your creative crew and how it's going to look and how it's going to sound. And I think most directors really get off of that, and it becomes quite an alchemic process. And writing is often a big part of it's quite solitary. So I'm very keen, likewise, to look to collaborate with writers, or potentially find a book to adapt, because you're at least working from some like raw material.
Well, since my first film, I came up with the idea and write myself. So for the next one, I'm writing a story right now about early child marriage in Indonesia. So I want to explore a political aspect and different perspective of it, and that's what I'm working on.
Moi, actuellement, je suis aussi en train d'écrire un nouveau film.
I am also started working on another film.
Et je continue aussi mon activité d'acteur, parce que je suis acteur de théâtre. Je joue beaucoup au théâtre.
At the same time, in parallel, I'm working. I'm an actor, theater, so I keep on acting.
Et ça m'aide d'avoir cette activité pour pas m'épuiser à l'écriture, parce qu'il y a des moments de découragement.
And this helps me, because otherwise I would get tired out. By writing is very demanding, so that helps me to carry on.
Alors me concernant, j'ai envie de continuer ce travail d'adaptation qui me passionne depuis mes courts-métrages.
I'd like to continue, and I'm continuing after my short film.
Donc là, c'est mon premier long métrage.
And this is the first long length, full length film.
Donc je lis beaucoup en ce moment.
I'm reading
de
quite a
romans.
lot of novels.
J'avais adapté pour les cours Charles Bukowski et Alphonse Daudet.
She had in the past adapted a film, a book by Alphonse Daudet.
Et je veux continuer à me servir de textes comme tremplin d'inspiration.
And she continues using text as a way of a jumping board to inspire herself.
Nabil?
Well, I'll tell you the truth. I don't feel and I was saying it to my producer Bruno now a few minutes ago, the necessity to do a film after another. It has to come because it's hard, to do films. It's very demanding. It's a lot of years of work, and you need a break sometime. And the paradox is that it's like probably everybody here, maybe except you, my only way of expression. And the weird thing is that when it is your way of expression, you should have the possibility to try and to be wrong and stop and do something else, 1 foot forward, 2 foot backwards, like a painter could try and say, no, this is not that, or a writer. And cinema, you cannot do that. When you're a director, you cannot say, I'm going to shoot 2 weeks, and after 2 weeks say, oh, I'm wrong. This is not what I wanted to express. So, well, otherwise your producer would not be very happy. So it has, to live inside of me, it has to take time. It's a long process.
I'll come back to Cleo, but I won't give you that question again, and we'll give you the final word because we have to wrap up. But jumping off what Nabil said, you've worked as an artist before, and so do you feel there is a massive difference in the way you approach the project in that way between the mediums?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've always worked with film, but I guess. Sorry, I know I'm not going to do a very good job of answering this, but yeah, it doesn't feel massively different in a way because I think it sort of relates in a funny way to the question about what of oneself is in the film, and for me, I think I always think they're about other people, or that they're not anything to do with me, and I often don't see what they had to do with me until a long time later. But there's some sort of compulsion to tell this particular story, and you don't fully understand what it is, and that might not reveal itself in terms of what it is personally until quite a lot later.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you all for coming, and all of you for coming and attending the press conference. Thanks so much.